David Ashford was 44 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, he believed the worst thing his marriage had become was a quiet disappointment. He had built ClearPath Logistics from 2 trucks and a leased garage in Fresno into a $50 million company over 17 years. 340 employees, 5 states, every single dollar earned by hand. His wife, Gabrielle, had never touched a day of that work. But she had watched it, studied it, and for 2 years, while kissing him goodbye and sitting beside him at company dinners, she had been systematically planning to take it. The morning Jerome slid that court filing across the desk, David read Gabrielle's demand for 51% of everything he had ever built. A controlling stake, not a settlement. She had hired the most aggressive corporate law firm in San Francisco to dismantle him. What Gabrielle never considered, not for a single moment, was that those lawyers had been working for David the entire time. She had handed him the weapon and called it her plan. And what David did next would cost her everything she thought she had already won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The pre-dawn air hung thick with diesel fumes and early morning silence as Ash's key turned in the lock of ClearPath Logistics' main entrance. The converted warehouse sprawled across 3 acres on Fresno's east side, its weathered exterior a testament to 17 years of steady growth. He could have moved headquarters years ago, could have built something sleek and modern closer to downtown. But this place had memory in its bones. The motion sensors caught his movement, bringing the fluorescent lights up in sections. His footsteps echoed across the concrete floor as he made his way through the loading bay. 2 night shift workers, Marcus and Ray, looked up from their tablets where they tracked incoming shipments. "Morning, Mr. Ashford," Marcus called out, raising his coffee in greeting. "Morning, gentlemen." Ash nodded, continuing his walk through the facility. He ran his hand along the side of a freshly washed truck, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. His father had driven trucks like these for 30 years. Now Ash owned a fleet of them. In his office, he settled into the chair he'd bought, used, when ClearPath was still just 2 trucks and a dream. The framed photo of his father's first rig hung on the wall, next to his mother's handwritten note. "Don't let success make you stupid." He smiled at that, unpacking the lunch he still made himself every morning. Turkey sandwich, apple, nothing fancy. The quarterly reports waited in his inbox. He pulled them up, scanning the numbers that told the story of ClearPath's latest expansion. 5 states now, 340 employees, profit margins holding steady despite fuel costs. He knew every aspect of the operation, could trace every dollar's journey through the company's veins. His eyes drifted to the photo on his desk. Him and Gabrielle at last year's company picnic. Her smile was perfect, practiced. Everything about her was practiced lately. The late-night calls she took in the guest room. The careful questions about operating structure and board composition. The unexplained trips to San Francisco that she attributed to shopping, but never seemed to produce any packages. 8 years ago, when they'd married, she'd been different. Or maybe he had been different. More willing to believe that her social grace could complement his quiet focus. She'd helped him navigate rooms he'd never been comfortable in, translated the unspoken language of country clubs and charity galas. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. The partnership had become a performance. He noted these changes the way he noted everything. Carefully, quietly, without reaction. Filed them away like entries in a ledger. The outer office door opened and closed. Jerome's familiar footsteps approached. He'd know that walk anywhere, had known it since they were kids on the same Fresno block. The fact that Jerome was here this early meant something needed attention. Jerome appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Without a word, he closed the office door, something he never did, and crossed to Ash's desk. A manila envelope appeared from under his arm, landing on the polished wood with a soft thump. Ash looked at the envelope, then at Jerome. His oldest friend's face gave nothing away, but the closed door said everything. He opened the envelope, sliding out a stack of legal papers. The header read, Superior Court of California, County of Fresno. Below that, in clean black type, Gabriel Ashford, petitioner, versus David Ashford, respondent. A divorce filing. But that wasn't what made his jaw tighten as he read further. The legal theory laid out in the complaint went far beyond a simple dissolution of marriage. Gabriel's lawyers, Voss and Meridian, a heavyweight firm out of San Francisco, were arguing for a constructive trust. They claimed that ClearPath Logistics had been built substantially on Gabriel's uncompensated contributions, social capital, and deferred career sacrifice. They wanted 51% of the company, a controlling stake, not money. The company itself. Ash read the complaint a second time, absorbing every word, every implication. Then he closed the folder with steady hands and leaned back in his chair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the warehouse, a forklift beeped as it backed up. He looked at Jerome and spoke 2 words, Call Roland. The relief that flashed across Jerome's face was brief but unmistakable. He nodded once and reached for his phone. Jerome was already dialing Roland's number, his expression a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction that told Ash everything he needed to know. The wheels were already in motion. They had been for months. 6 months earlier, Ash had noticed the first signs. Gabrielle's questions about company structure had become too precise, too calculated. She'd started spending more time with her college friend Tanya, who specialized in corporate litigation. Most telling were the calls she took in the guest room, voice lowered, door closed. We should consider an internal audit, Ash had told Jerome one morning. Pre-expansion review, something routine. Jerome had understood immediately. He'd reached out to Diana, a forensic accountant they'd worked with before. She was thorough, discreet, and most importantly, wouldn't raise any red flags. The audit was announced as standard procedure, preparation for ClearPath's planned expansion into a 6th state. Diana's initial findings had been subtle but unmistakable. Company financial data was leaving the building, not through hacks or breaches, but through careful social engineering. The source was Kevin Matthews, a bookkeeper Gabrielle had personally recommended 2 years prior. Young, eager, and apparently very willing to feed quarterly reports, contract values, and valuation projections to an outside party. He's been accessing files outside his normal scope, Diana had explained, spreading documents across Ash's desk after hours. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger automatic alerts, but there's a pattern. And there are deposits to his personal account that don't match his salary schedule. Ash had absorbed this information the way he absorbed everything. Quietly, thoroughly, without immediate reaction. Keep digging, he'd told Diana. I want to know where those deposits originate. That same week, Ash had made the call to Roland Voss. He'd chosen Roland carefully. Not because they were friends, they weren't, but because 3 years earlier, Voss and Meridian had handled some insurance work adjacent to ClearPath. Ash had read enough about Roland to know he was, above all else, a pragmatist. The meeting had taken place in San Francisco, in a private room at a restaurant chosen for its discretion. Roland had listened without interruption as Ash laid out what he suspected was coming. My wife is going to hire your firm, Ash had said, his voice level. She's going to file for divorce and attempt a hostile takeover of my company. I'm asking you to take her case and work for me. Roland's expression hadn't changed. That would be a significant conflict of interest. Only if it's not properly structured, Ash had replied, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a legal framework creating a subsidiary entity through which Roland's true representation would flow. The arrangement was unconventional but airtight, legal, expensive. Roland had studied the documents for several long minutes. You understand that if we accept, We'll have to represent her interests with full professional diligence, in appearance at least. I'm counting on it, Ash had said. I want every motion filed, every discovery request made, every deposition scheduled. I want it all to look exactly like what she expects. But every piece needs to build the record that will destroy her case. Roland had smiled then, a small, precise expression. You've thought this through. I built this company by thinking things through. Now, in the present, Jerome handed Ash the phone. Roland's voice came through clear and professional. The complaint was filed this morning. Everything is in place. The constructive trust argument will be handled exactly as we discussed. Every motion we file on her behalf will lay the foundation for the counter-evidence. When the moment comes, the pivot will be clean and absolute. Ash absorbed this, watching the early morning sun start to paint the warehouse walls through his office window. And the ethical framework is solid. Uncomfortable for some of my partners, but solid. The subsidiary structure will hold. Good. Ash's voice remained steady. Proceed as planned. He ended the call and looked at Jerome, who had been with him since the beginning, since ClearPath was just 2 trucks and a mountain of debt. His oldest friend. The one person who had known everything from the moment Diana found the leak. She spent 2 years planning the heist. Ash said quietly. I spent 6 months building the vault around her. Diana arrived at Ash's office 3 days later, carrying a thick manila folder with the kind of careful precision that meant she'd found something significant. She placed it on his desk without ceremony. You'll want to sit with this one, she said quietly. Inside were bank statements, transaction records, and a carefully documented trail that explained exactly where Kevin's loyalty had been purchased. The payments hadn't come directly from Gabrielle. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they traced to a holding company registered in Delaware, which in turn connected to an account belonging to Brett Holloway. Tell me about Holloway, Ash said, studying the documentation. Diana pulled out a separate sheet. Commercial real estate developer based in the Bay Area. Specializes in acquiring and repositioning distressed or contested properties. His portfolio's worth north of $200 million, but there are some interesting patterns in how he structures his acquisition. Ash nodded, absorbing this. Interesting how? He tends to work through subsidiary entities, multiple layers of corporate structure. Makes it hard to trace ownership directly back to him. Legal, but deliberately complex. Diana paused. There's something else. The first payment to Kevin was dated 14 months ago. 14 months. Ash felt something cold settle in his chest as he did the mental calculation. 14 months ago, ClearPath had held its annual company banquet, a celebration of another year of growth, another expansion milestone. He remembered Gabrielle standing beside him at the podium, glass raised, speaking about partnership and legacy and shared dreams. I need you to keep digging, he told Diana. Everything you can find on Holloway's acquisition patterns, his corporate structures, his business associates, and I need a separate investigation track. Diana nodded, already taking notes. Parameters: personal connection between Holloway and my wife. Discreet, but thorough. Jerome had a recommendation ready. A private investigator he'd used before. Someone who understood both discretion and documentation. Within a week, the confirmation arrived in another manila folder. Photographs, hotel records, credit card statements. Gabrielle and Brett Holloway had been meeting regularly for at least 14 months. The timeline was exact. Ash sat with this information for a full day, letting it settle into his bones. The affair itself wasn't the wound. He had suspected something similar for months. It was the precision of the timeline, the calculated nature of it all. 14 months ago, Gabrielle had stood in front of his employees, his friends, his mother, and performed partnership while already laying the groundwork for extraction. That evening, after the warehouse had emptied and the night shift had taken over, Ash drove to his mother's house on the east side of Fresno. Patricia Ashford still lived in the same modest home where she'd raised him, refusing all offers to upgrade. "Don't let success make you stupid," she always said. The same words she'd written on the note still taped to his office monitor. She was waiting at the kitchen table when he arrived, 2 cups of coffee already poured. She didn't ask why he was there so late. She just waited, watching him with the steady patience that had shaped his own character. Ash laid out everything: the divorce filing, the constructive trust argument, Roland's arrangement, Diana's findings, the Holloway connection, the 14-month timeline. He spoke plainly, without emotion, the way he'd learned from her. Not seeking comfort, but needing the clarity that came from saying things out loud to someone who had always seen straight through to the truth of matters. Patricia listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her expression unchanging. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, considering everything with the same careful attention she'd always given to important matters. Finally, she looked at him directly. "You already know what to do," she said. "You're just making sure you feel right about it." Ash nodded. He did. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after decisions are fully made. Ash walked through ClearPath's main floor, nodding to the early shift workers before reaching Jerome's office. His CFO was already waiting, 2 cups of coffee on his desk. "We start today," Ash said, settling into the chair across from Jerome. "Call Diana first. I want her to begin organizing every financial document from the company's founding through the date of my marriage to Gabrielle. Everything that shows sole ownership and development." Jerome nodded, pulling out a legal pad. "I've already flagged the key documents from the first 5 years. The garage lease, the initial truck purchases, the first 3 major contracts, all predating Gabrielle by almost a decade." "Good. Next, I need you to handle Kevin's termination. Clean, professional, documented. Have HR prepare a severance package and non-disclosure agreement. Make sure the language specifically references unauthorized disclosure of company financial data as the cause. And if he refuses to sign, then we explain that the alternative is a criminal referral for corporate espionage. But he'll sign. He's 26 and scared. He'll take the exit we're offering." By noon, Roland had filed Voss and Meridian's official appearance as Gabrielle's counsel. The news rippled through San Francisco's legal community. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes divorce battle that generated headlines. Gabrielle's initial filing for a constructive trust over ClearPath had already raised eyebrows. Now, with one of the city's premier firms backing her play, the story had real momentum. Roland scheduled their first strategy session for Wednesday. Ash watched through Jerome's carefully placed sources as Gabrielle arrived at Voss and Meridian's offices, dressed impeccably, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from believing you hold all the cards. Roland spent 3 hours with her, carefully steering her toward increasingly aggressive discovery requests. Exactly what Ash needed her to do. "Full financial disclosure," Roland advised her, his tone professionally measured. "We need everything: asset valuations, contract terms, revenue projections. Your contribution claim will be stronger with a complete picture of the company's growth during the marriage." Gabrielle left the meeting practically glowing. That afternoon, her team filed their first round of discovery requests, comprehensive, aggressive, demanding total transparency into ClearPath's operations. Ash's team responded within 48 hours, delivering bankers' boxes of meticulously organized documentation. Every file was indexed, every contribution traced, every premarital asset highlighted. Diana had spent months preparing this response, structuring it to tell the story Ash needed told. 17 years of single-minded building, with the first 13 happening before Gabrielle entered the picture. Meanwhile, Kevin's termination proceeded exactly as Ash had predicted. The young bookkeeper sat across from HR, pale but composed, as they presented the severance terms and non-disclosure agreement. When they mentioned the possibility of criminal charges as the alternative, he signed without hesitation. He was escorted out quietly, his access cards deactivated, his company email already dark. Diana worked through the weekend, assembling what she called the architecture files, documentation that traced ClearPath's ownership structure from its founding through every subsequent reorganization. Each change was dated, each decision memorialized with witness signatures and notarized documents. The timeline was pristine, showing a clear pattern of sole ownership and controlled growth that began long before the marriage. On Friday afternoon, Gabrielle called Ash directly. Her voice had that careful modulation she used when playing a specific role. In this case, the wounded but reasonable wife seeking compromise. "This doesn't have to get ugly," she said. "We built something beautiful together. Why are we letting lawyers tear it apart?" Ash listened, keeping his voice warm and receptive. "Maybe you're right. What did you have in mind? We could meet, just us. Talk about fair division, about preserving what matters, about finding a way forward that honors both our contributions." "I'd like that," Ash replied, his tone genuine enough to be convincing. "Let me think about it over the weekend. We'll talk next week." After hanging up, he sat in his office as the sun set, methodically reviewing Diana's latest binders of documentation. He marked 3 sections with yellow post-its, key pieces that Roland would need to see immediately. Each note contained precise instructions about timing and context. He meant none of what he'd said to Gabrielle. The time for conversation had ended 14 months ago, in a hotel room with Brett Holloway, when she'd decided that partnership meant something very different to her than it did to him. The documentation told the real story, not of betrayal, but of preparation, of patience, of the quiet power that comes from building something so solid that no one can take it from you, no matter how carefully they plan. Roland's call came just after lunch. Jerome patched it through to the conference room where Ash sat alone, spreadsheets spread across the polished table. "I have the complete picture," Roland said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone measuring every word. "You'll want to be sitting for this." Ash set down his pen. "I'm listening." The constructive trust claim was never the endgame. It was just the first domino. Roland paused, papers shuffling in the background. "We've obtained communications between Gabrielle and Brett Holloway, dating back approximately 24 months. They detail a significantly more elaborate strategy." Ash's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly on the phone. "Go on." The plan was multi-staged. First, secure the 51% controlling interest through the constructive trust argument. That much you knew. But Phase 2 involved using that controlling stake to force an immediate sale of ClearPath to a holding company called Vista Ridge Partners. Roland's voice took on an edge of professional distaste. A holding company in which Brett Holloway holds a 60% interest. The sale terms? They had a target valuation of roughly 30% below market. The structure would have forced you to accept minority shareholder status with no operational control. Within 6 months, you would have been completely locked out of the company you built. More papers shuffled. They were thorough in their planning. Every step was documented, every contingency considered. They even had draft press releases prepared to frame the sale as a strategic partnership that would preserve ClearPath's legacy while enabling its next phase of growth. Ash absorbed this in silence. The betrayal wasn't in the plan itself. He had already suspected something similar. The wound was in the timeline. 2 years of preparation meant Gabrielle had started plotting this while they were still sharing meals, still discussing future plans, still maintaining the appearance of partnership. "The documentation is extensive," Roland continued. "Email chains, meeting notes, preliminary term sheets. They were confident enough in their strategy to create a considerable paper trail. That confidence will prove unfortunate for them. Who else knows the full scope? Currently? Myself, two senior associates who are bound by both privilege and self-interest, and Brett Holloway's corporate counsel, who, I should note, has already begun distancing his client from the more aggressive aspects of the strategy. Ash nodded, though Roland couldn't see it. "Thank you for the clarity. Do you need anything else from my team?" "Not today. Maintain course. I'll have Jerome coordinate next steps through the usual channels." After ending the call, Ash sat motionless in the conference room for several minutes. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the financial documents that suddenly seemed both vital and oddly insignificant. At 6 p.m., long after most employees had left, Ash walked the warehouse floor alone. His footsteps echoed in the vast space. He touched familiar surfaces, the first loading dock he'd personally operated, the wall where they'd mounted their first state carrier certification, the break room table where he'd sat with drivers planning routes until midnight in those early years. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was an attempt to erase 17 years of early mornings and late nights, of missed weekends and delayed vacations, of countless small decisions that accumulated into something substantial enough to be worth stealing. He remembered Gabrielle at company events, smiling and gracious, working the room with practiced ease, all while knowing she was documenting everything, building her case, preparing to convert his life's work into her next chapter. The performance would have been impressive if it hadn't been so calculated. Near midnight, he stood in the spot where he'd parked his first delivery truck, a used Ford he'd bought with a loan co-signed by his father. The space was now occupied by newer vehicles, but he could still see that old truck clearly in his mind. His father had helped him paint the company name on the side, insisting they do it by hand rather than paying for professional lettering. "A man should put his own hands on his beginning," his father had said. Now, in the empty warehouse, Ash felt the weight of that beginning, and the specific gravity of knowing exactly how someone had planned to end it. The grief wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the quiet recognition that something had broken permanently, not from the attempt to take what he'd built, but from the intimacy required to even try. He left the warehouse at 1 a.m. and drove home in silence. The next morning, he arrived at his office at the usual time, outwardly unchanged. Jerome was already waiting when he walked in. "It's time to build the stage," Ash said simply. Jerome already had his notepad open, pen poised. He didn't need to ask what that meant. The performance they'd been preparing for was about to begin. The Voss and Meridian satellite office occupied the 4th floor of a glass-fronted building in downtown Fresno. Ash straightened his tie as he and Jerome walked through the lobby. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tinted windows, making the marble floors look deeper than they were. "You ready?" Jerome asked, as they waited for the elevator. Ash nodded once. He had prepared for this moment for months. Every document was in place, every detail memorized, every response calculated. The conference room doors were already open when they arrived. Gabrielle sat at the far end of the polished table, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Ash's first delivery truck. Her personal attorney, Martin Chen, sat beside her reviewing papers. 2 court reporters were setting up their equipment. Roland Voss stood as they entered. Professional courtesy, perfect. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for joining us." 3 associates flanked him, each with identical stacks of documents before them. The choreography was flawless. No one would have guessed Roland had been on a strategy call with Ash just yesterday. "Let's begin," Roland said once everyone was seated. The court reporter raised her right hand, and Ash was sworn in. The first hour focused on ClearPath's founding. Roland's questions were precise, each one designed to seem aggressive, while actually allowing Ash to build his narrative. "You started the company with how much capital?" $47,000, a bank loan co-signed by my father. "And Mrs. Ashford's contribution at that time?" "I hadn't met Gabrielle yet. This was 2006, 8 years before our marriage." Roland maintained steady eye contact, his expression neutral. "Walk us through the initial asset acquisition." For the next 2 hours, Ash methodically detailed every truck purchase, every lease agreement, every expansion decision. His voice remained measured, but the cumulative weight of 17 years of work filled the room. He described negotiating his first major contract while sitting in his truck between deliveries. He recounted the night he and Jerome worked until dawn, restructuring routes when fuel prices spiked in 2008. Gabrielle's expression didn't change, but her fingers tapped slightly against her water glass. After lunch, Roland's questioning grew more pointed. Mrs. Ashford claims her social connections were instrumental in ClearPath's growth. Would you agree? Gabrielle helped us navigate certain social circles after our marriage in 2014, Ash replied. By then, we were already operating in 3 states, with annual revenue of $28 million. Martin Chen shifted in his chair. Objection. The witness is editorializing. I'm simply providing context for the timeline, Ash said calmly. That's when it happened, the moment Diana had prepared for. Chen, trying to protect his client, pressed further. Mrs. Ashford's contributions extended beyond mere social connections. She was integral to strategic planning and relationship management. Roland's expression didn't flicker. Would you like to expand on those specific contributions, counsel? We can enter them into the record. It was a perfect trap. By asserting Gabrielle's direct involvement in strategic planning, Chen had opened the door for Roland to introduce Diana's meticulously prepared documentation of every actual corporate decision, complete with dates, participants, and outcomes. The paper trail would show Gabrielle's absence from virtually every meaningful strategic discussion. The afternoon continued. Roland probed ClearPath's financing structure, expansion timeline, and operational hierarchy. Each question seemed designed to challenge Ash while actually reinforcing the foundation of his case. Ash responded with quiet precision, neither defensive nor aggressive, just factual. And the warehouse renovation in 2012? Self-financed through operating revenue. The documentation is in Exhibit C. The fleet expansion in 2015? Bank financing secured against existing assets and contracts. The terms are detailed in Section 4. Hour after hour, Ash built the record, not just of ownership, but of the specific gravity of building something from nothing. Every answer illuminated the distance between creating value and claiming it. By the 6th hour, even the court reporters looked drained. But Ash's composure never wavered. He had spent 17 years building ClearPath. He could spend 6 hours defending it. As they packed up, Gabrielle caught his eye briefly. She saw his calmness as arrogance, his precision as pride. She didn't understand that his stillness wasn't weakness. It was the same discipline that had built the company she was trying to take. In the parking garage afterward, Gabrielle pulled out her phone. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face as she typed, "He doesn't even know what's coming." The message went to Tanya, who was sitting in her own office across town. She stared at the text for a long moment, her finger hovering over the response field, but she couldn't find the words. Or perhaps, more accurately, she wasn't ready to use them yet. She set her phone down without replying. Ash sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of hearing preparation documents. Diana's financial analysis on his left, Roland's briefing materials on his right. The house felt different now, emptier since Gabrielle had moved out, but somehow more honest. The silence wasn't lonely. It was clarifying. He checked his watch, 8:47 p.m. The preliminary injunction hearing was less than 40 hours away. He'd been reviewing Roland's outline of the asset freeze argument when his phone lit up with an unknown number. David Ashford speaking. There was a pause, then, "Mr. Ashford, this is Tanya Mitchell." Ash set down his pen. He knew her voice from corporate events, from holiday parties where she'd stood beside Gabrielle. champagne in hand, watching him build the company they now wanted to take. "I want to be clear about something," Tanya continued, her voice tight. "I'm not calling because I feel any particular loyalty to you. We barely know each other." "I understand," Ash said quietly. "Why are you calling, Tanya?" "Because my deposition is scheduled for next week, and She took a breath. "I won't commit perjury. I can't. And there are things I know, things I've been carrying, that I can't keep carrying." Ash remained silent, letting her continue. 14 months ago, there was a dinner at Holloway's house in Pacific Heights. Gabrielle told me it was just a casual thing, but Brett had his business partner there, and his corporate counsel. Tanya's voice grew steadier as she spoke. "That's where they first mapped it out. The whole plan. Brett even had preliminary valuation documents for ClearPath." Ash reached for a legal pad, his movements deliberately slow. "Go on?" "They incorporated the holding company 2 days later. Peninsula Acquisition Partners, LLC. It's registered in Delaware, but the operational address is a Holloway Properties subsidiary office in San Mateo." Tanya paused. They really thought you wouldn't fight, that you'd take the buyout, because it would be easier than a public battle." Ash wrote down the company name in his precise handwriting. "Is there anything else you need to tell me, Tanya?" I'm sorry. Not for telling you this now, but for not saying something sooner. I told myself it wasn't my business, that Gabrielle must have her reasons, but watching it all, being part of it by staying quiet." She trailed off. "Thank you for calling," Ash said simply. "You did the right thing." After ending the call, Ash sat motionless for exactly 30 seconds, processing. Then he picked up his phone again and dialed Diana's number. "I need everything you can find on Peninsula Acquisition Partners, LLC. Delaware registration, San Mateo operational address. Priority 1. He gave her the details from Tanya's call. Diana's response was immediate. "I'll have preliminary findings within 3 hours. Full documentation package by morning." Next, he called Roland. "Peninsula Acquisition Partners," Roland repeated, typing audibly in the background. "This closes the loop perfectly. We can introduce it through the supplemental filing we prepared. Everything else is in position." The judge's clerk confirmed our hearing schedule. 2 hours, starting at 9 a.m. "Any last-minute issues I should know about?" "None. The structural work is solid. The evidence chain is clean. We're ready." Roland's voice held the calm certainty of a man who had built something unassailable. Ash ended the call and stood up, walking to the window. The street was quiet, houses dark except for the occasional blue flicker of television screens. Somewhere out there, Gabrielle was probably reviewing her own preparation document, still confident in her plan's perfection. He picked up his phone one last time and called Jerome. "Got something for you," Ash said when Jerome answered. "Hit me." Tanya just called, gave us the holding company name and the dinner date where they planned it. "Diana's running full documentation now. Roland's ready to introduce it Thursday." Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then, "We're ready." "Been ready," Jerome replied, exhaling slowly. Ash looked at the documents spread across his kitchen table. 17 years of work, every detail preserved, every decision documented. The evidence of a life built through discipline and dedication, not manipulation and extraction. The sound of distant traffic drifted through the window. Somewhere in the city, Diana was already beginning her search. Roland was finalizing the hearing strategy, and Jerome, like always, was standing ready. Everything was in position. 2 days until the hearing. 2 days until Gabrielle and Holloway learned what Ash had known for months. You can't steal something from a man who spent 17 years learning how to protect it. The Fresno County Superior Court building stood 6 stories tall, its concrete and glass facade catching the early morning light. Ash adjusted his dark suit jacket as he climbed the steps, Jerome matching his stride. The weight of 17 years rode with them through the security checkpoint, Up the elevator, down the third-floor corridor. Inside courtroom 3B, Patricia Ashford was already seated in the gallery's second row, exactly where Ash had asked her to be. Her presence wasn't for show. It was positioning. A mother watching justice arrive on schedule. At 8:55 a.m., Gabrielle entered with her legal team, Roland Voss, two Voss and Meridian associates, and her personal attorney, Catherine Chen. Gabrielle wore a navy dress that probably cost more than Ash's first truck. Her composure was practiced, precise. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table without glancing in Ash's direction. Brett Holloway slipped into the back row of the gallery at 8:59, wearing an expensive suit that somehow still looked borrowed. His presence was expected. Ash had factored it into the architecture of this moment. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Marina Santos entered. Please be seated. We're here for preliminary injunctive relief in Ashford versus Ashford. Mr. Voss, you may proceed. Roland rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. For the next 45 minutes, he delivered a masterclass in corporate litigation, arguing passionately for an emergency asset freeze of ClearPath Logistics. His command of precedent was impressive. His framing of Gabrielle's contributions was artful. He built his case like a mason laying stones, each argument supporting the next. Your Honor, Roland concluded, Mrs. Ashford's substantial uncompensated contributions to ClearPath's growth create an equitable interest that must be protected during these proceedings. Without an immediate asset freeze, Mr. Ashford remains free to diminish or encumber company assets, potentially rendering any final judgment meaningless. Judge Santos looked up from her notes. Thank you, Mr. Voss. Response? Roland remained standing. Yes, Your Honor, but I'll be responding on behalf of the defendant, David Ashford. The courtroom went absolutely still. Catherine Chen shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor! This is an outrageous conflict of interest. Mr. Voss cannot possibly. If I may, Roland interrupted smoothly, reaching for a thick binder. I've prepared a comprehensive brief explaining the legal architecture of this arrangement. With the court's permission? Judge Santos's expression didn't change. Proceed. For the next 20 minutes, Roland methodically walked through the subsidiary entity structure, the timing of his retention by Ash, the ethical screens, the disclosure requirements, everything documented, everything dated, everything precise. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering. Catherine Chen kept objecting, but each objection only gave Roland another opportunity to demonstrate how thoroughly they'd anticipated every challenge. The arrangement was unconventional, yes, but it was legal. It was documented. It was ironclad. When Roland finished, Judge Santos spent 11 silent minutes reviewing the submissions. The only sound in the courtroom was paper turning. The motion for preliminary injunction is denied, she said finally. Mr. Voss, you may introduce your counterfiling. Roland nodded and produced another binder. Your Honor, we're prepared to present evidence regarding Peninsula Acquisition Partners, LLC, a holding company registered in Delaware with operational offices in San Mateo, California. This entity was incorporated 14 months ago by Brett Holloway specifically to acquire ClearPath Logistics at below market value following this planned litigation. We have documentation of financial transfers to a ClearPath employee, evidence of corporate espionage, and a complete timeline of the conspiracy between Mr. Holloway and Mrs. Ashford dating back to a specific dinner meeting in Pacific Heights. Gabrielle's perfect composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. Your Honor, Catherine Chen said, I request a brief recess. Granted. 20 minutes. In the hallway, Chen pulled Gabrielle aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. I can't defend what I can't explain. Brett Holloway exited the gallery and walked straight to the elevator, never making eye contact with anyone. His expensive suit suddenly looked not just borrowed, but stolen. When court resumed, Judge Santos studied the room with careful attention. I'm scheduling a sanctions hearing for next month. I'm also referring this matter to the State Bar for review. She made a final notation in her calendar. We're adjourned. Ash kept looking straight ahead, his expression unchanged. In the gallery, Patricia folded her hands in her lap, as still and certain as her son. The marital home sat quiet on its tree-lined street, looking exactly as it had 3 months ago when Ash last pulled into the driveway. The landscaping was still perfect. Gabrielle had always insisted on weekly maintenance. The front door still had that slight stick at the top hinge that he'd never gotten around to fixing. Ash sat in his car for exactly 1 minute, hands resting on the steering wheel. He wasn't gathering courage. He was mentally reviewing his architecture, making sure every beam was in place. Then he got out and walked to the door. Gabrielle answered on the second knock. She wore casual clothes, designer casual, but casual, and no makeup. It made her look younger, more like the woman he'd married. She stepped back without speaking, letting him enter. The kitchen was where they'd had all their important conversations. It seemed fitting to have this last one there. Ash took a seat at the granite island, while Gabrielle leaned against the counter near the sink. Neither offered coffee. This wasn't that kind of meeting. I want you to understand exactly what happened, Ash said, his voice level and clear. Not because I need you to feel bad, because I need you to know that none of this was necessary. Gabrielle didn't interrupt. Her fingers traced patterns on the counter's edge. 6 months ago, I noticed the pattern change. The calls from the guest room. The questions about company structure. The time with Tanya. I didn't react because that's not what I do. I observe. I build. So I hired Diana. He described finding the financial leak through Kevin. The discovery of Brett Holloway. The timeline that stretched back 14 months to that dinner in Pacific Heights, where they'd first sketched out the plan. 14 months ago, Ash continued, you stood up at the company banquet and gave that toast about partnership, about legacy. You were already planning how to take it apart. That's what I can't get past. Not the affair. Affairs happen. Not wanting out. Marriages end. It's the performance, the precision of it. You turned our life into a transaction and never missed a line of dialogue. Gabrielle's fingers stopped moving on the counter. She looked at him directly for the first time. You want to know why? Her voice was soft, but not weak. Because I spent 8 years being invisible, standing in rooms while people talked around me to get to you, watching you build this empire that I helped shape but never really belonged to. I was the supporting character in the David Ashford story. Always. And at some point, I decided that if that's all I was going to be, I might as well write my own ending. Ash let the words settle. He owed her that much. The kitchen clock ticked 7 times before he spoke again. You had every right to leave. You had no right to try to take what I bled for. Those are 2 different things, and you know it. He stood up, keys already in hand. Gabrielle stayed at the counter, still looking at him. There was something in her expression, not quite regret, not quite defiance, something in between. The settlement offer is fair, he said. It reflects what you're legally entitled to from the marriage. Diana ran the numbers 3 times. Take it. He walked to the door, his footsteps echoing in the perfect kitchen they'd remodeled 2 years ago. He didn't look back. Some architectures are meant to be walked away from. In the weeks that followed, the legal machinery ground forward with brutal efficiency. The constructive trust claim was dismissed with prejudice. Gabrielle's final settlement, while substantial in absolute terms, represented only legitimate marital assets. It was fair, it was legal. It was nowhere near what she'd planned. Brett Holloway's holding company, Peninsula Acquisition Partners LLC, lost 2 major development partnerships when the connection to the attempted ClearPath takeover became public. No criminal charges were filed. The evidence was damning but not quite prosecutable. But the reputational damage stuck like tar. The State Bar's inquiry into Voss and Meridian's role generated a profile in the California Legal Weekly that would follow the firm for years. Two significant clients departed quietly. Roland considered it a reasonable price for perfect execution. Tanya testified honestly in her deposition, describing the Pacific Heights dinner in detail. She did not embellish or accuse. She simply told the truth. Gabrielle never spoke to her again, because some betrayals are forgivable, but honesty rarely is. The kitchen conversation was the last time Ash and Gabrielle spoke directly. There was no need for more words. The architecture was complete. The truth was what it had always been, visible to anyone who knew how to read the blueprint. The warehouse lights cast a warm glow across the polished concrete floor, where folding tables had been arranged in a horseshoe pattern. The space didn't look like a warehouse tonight. White tablecloths and centerpieces softened the industrial edges, though no amount of decoration could completely hide the building's honest bones. Ash wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Metal chairs scraped concrete as 40 people settled in for dinner. Jerome sat with his wife and kids near the head of the table, his new president of operations nameplate catching the light. The promotion had been announced that morning, along with the hire of a new CFO, a woman Patricia had personally vetted and approved after 3 separate conversations about integrity. The east wall drew everyone's attention. The mural stretched 2 stories high, a striking piece commissioned from a local Fresno artist depicting the history of black labor in the Central Valley. Field workers merged into truck drivers, merged into warehouse staff, merged into office workers, all rendered in bold colors against a backdrop of valley landscapes. Time flowing forward like a river, each generation lifting the next. Patricia watched her son move through the room, stopping to speak with each guest. She noticed how the longest-tenured employees, the ones who'd been there when it was just 2 trucks and a dream, looked at him with the same respect they always had. Money hadn't changed that. The lawsuit hadn't changed that. Some things, once built properly, could withstand any storm. The new CFO, Sandra Chen, was deep in conversation with Jerome about expanding routes into Nevada when Ash passed their table. 6 states by summer, she was saying, already planning 3 moves ahead. Jerome caught Ash's eye and smiled. A quiet acknowledgement between old friends. They'd chosen well. Marcus Johnson, who'd driven ClearPath's very first route 12 years ago and now managed the entire California fleet, stood to make a toast. "To the company," he said, raising his glass. Then, with meaning, "To the man who built it." The room raised their glasses, but Ash shook his head slightly. "To the people who built it," he corrected. "All of them." He gestured to the room, to the drivers and dispatchers and mechanics who'd chosen to stay through everything, who'd never doubted, never wavered. Patricia waited until the dinner was winding down, until the conversations had broken into smaller groups and the dessert plates were being cleared. She touched her son's arm and nodded toward the quiet corner near the dispatch office. "Walk with me a minute," she said. They moved away from the warmth of the gathering. Patricia studied her son's face in the softer light. The same face she'd watched grow from a determined boy into this quietly formidable man. She saw everything he carried, everything he'd built, everything he'd protected. "Are you at peace?" she asked simply. Ash didn't answer immediately. He looked out across the warehouse floor, past the tables and chairs to the loading docks beyond, to the fleet parked in neat rows outside, to the 17 years contained in these walls. He thought about peace, about what it meant versus what people thought it meant. "I'm not at peace," he said finally. "I'm at work, but it's good work. That's enough." Patricia nodded, like she'd expected exactly that answer. Because she had. Because she'd raised him to understand the difference between peace and purpose, between comfort and commitment. The guests began saying their goodbyes, gathering coats and car keys. Jerome's kids hugged Ash before they left. They'd always called him Uncle, Lawsuit, or No Lawsuit. Sandra Chen was still making notes in her phone, already thinking about tomorrow. Marcus Johnson clapped Ash on the shoulder as he passed. No words needed. When the last car pulled away, Ash walked the warehouse floor alone. His footsteps echoed in the familiar space, the same footsteps that had marked 17 years of early mornings and late nights. He paused beneath the framed photograph of his father's first truck, studying the man standing proudly beside it. The truth settled over him like a mantle. You don't build something to own it. You build it to prove it can exist. Everything after that is maintenance. His fingers brushed the frame lightly. Then he turned, moved to the breaker panel, and shut off the lights section by section. The mural caught the last gleam of illumination before darkness claimed it too. His footsteps carried him to the exit, measured and sure. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.